Alrighty, everyone. So, this is chapter 11, part 4. So, these are just going to be, they're just in shorter segments to hopefully, I don't know, you guys would be more entertained for 10 minutes than like 40 minutes or over an hour, because those are getting ridiculously long. Alrighty. Cesarean Section by Choice, the Untold Story. Dr. Brenda Sylvester's choice for birth of her second baby was really made by the way her first baby arrived, even though she had prepared for a vaginal birth by taking Les Mas classes. Her firstborn turned breech in the 7th month, and all attempts for external version failed. There was no OB in the metropolitan area hospitals who would attend a vaginal breech birth for any mother, let alone a fellow physician having her first child. Dr. Sylvester planned for the inevitable cesarean. She came through with the experience, satisfied that she had made the best decision possible for her baby. The surgery hadn't been a panic, but she hadn't expected one. 2.5 years later, with a positive pregnancy test once again in hand, she already knew she would have a second cesarean. She realized that a vaginal birth after cesarean, a VBAC, was a possibility with the OB practice that employed nurse midwives, but she wasn't then a trial labor. In her early 30s, she was very healthy and had experienced no complications in her pregnancy. Her surgery was performed by one of the respected and highly experienced doctors of a group of OBs and midwives. Full-term baby boy residents, doctors in training, were put in charge of her post-operative care. If any complications developed, it was their responsibility to notify the attending physician. On the daily after surgery, the nurses who took care of Dr. Sylvester, sorry, I keep saying that wrong, on the postpartum floor were worried when they couldn't hear bowel sounds. Besides, she had more complaints of abdominal pain than they liked, and her temperature was slightly elevated. Several times they tried to alert the residents about these problems, but were told not to worry, that they had heard bowel sounds and were in touch with the attending physicians. 3 days after the surgery, Dr. Sylvester's blood test showed a slightly elevated white count, and more tests were done. Within 24 hours, she was in septic shock and placed on life support. 3 days later, she died of overwhelming infection brought on by a nicked bowel in surgery that hadn't been caught by the physicians and residents taking care of her. All of the nurses on that floor were furious because they knew that this death could have been avoided if their warnings had been heeded. That made them even sadder when Dr. Sylvester's family remained unaware that the nurses had tried fruitlessly to alert the attending physician to her condition at the time when something could possibly have been done to save her life. None of them could afford to spill the beans, so they kept their silence and their jobs. One of them, however, told me, and that was Ina May. Most Americans are unaware that women ever die from cesarean operations, particularly when those surgeries are scheduled rather than emergencies. Only rarely is a tragedy like this covered by the news media. Most maternal deaths in the United States are kept secret from the general public. Few people have any way of knowing that most maternal deaths take place in hospitals, or that unnecessary surgery can actually cause a death. The 21st century began with the revelation from Institute of Medicine of National Academies of Science that roughly 100,000 people die from medical mistakes in the United States every year. Some of them, too many, are pregnant women. This is so sad. Hey, baby. Women can hardly make truly informed decisions when some of the most relevant information is not available to them. How many know, for example, that cesarean section, including the scheduled kind, involves the following risks to women? It's fine, I'm watching Toon. Oh, I love you guys. So these are the following risks. Increase in hemorrhage requiring transfusion, hysterectomy for uncontrollable hemorrhage, accidental cutting of the bowel leading to peritonitis, possible colostomy or death, accidental cutting of the uterine artery, surgical trauma to bladder and uterus, increased postpartum infection, scar breakdown, scar pain, numbness, long-term severe back pain following epidural block, increased pulmonary embolism, anesthesia mishaps including paralysis and death. And again, these are very small percentages, but these are just the possible risks. When cesarean is elective with no emergency present, the woman's chance of dying from the procedure itself is nearly 3 times that of non-surgical birth. Cesareans involve risks for babies as well. If the cesarean is an emergency, the risk to the baby of doing the operation will likely be outweighed by the risks to the baby of not doing it. But if the cesarean is not medically necessary and the baby is not in trouble, the risks to the baby from doing the surgery meant that the baby you're putting the baby in unnecessary risk, unnecessary danger. Dangers to the baby in these cases include accidental fetal laceration, which occurs in nearly 2% of all cesareans. In breech presentations, the incidence rises to 6%. Respiratory distress. Hi. Respiratory distress, a major cause of neonatal mortality, is greatly reduced if the woman is allowed to go into labor prior to the cesarean section. Most women who choose cesarean, however, do not labor at all, since scheduling the surgery is often a high priority for them and their OBs. Accidental prematurity because the cesarean was performed too early, even repeated ultrasound scans do not rule out this possibility. Risks to women from cesarean sections are not limited to the current pregnancies, but extend to future pregnancies as well because of the scarring of the uterus. These risks include decreased fertility, abnormal adhesions leading to bowel obstruction. This risk can happen irrespective of future pregnancies and can be fatal. And Ina May says, I know 2 women who suffered life-threatening bowel obstructions 25 years after their cesareans. One, a good friend of mine, died from these complications. Increased tubal pregnancies, increased placenta previa, and again, that's when the placenta is covering the cervix opening. Increased in placenta accreta, the placenta attaches too deeply in the uterine wall to separate normally, profuse and often fatal hemorrhage as the result. Increased placenta abruptio, so that's the placenta separates from the uterus prematurely and it cuts off the baby's source of oxygen. Increase in uterine rupture. The great Dutch OB of Professor G.J. Klosterman made the following observation in 1984. No one way can we improve a normal pregnancy and labor in a healthy woman. We can only change it. but not for the better. This statement is still true despite the ever-increasing rate of OB meddling that goes on. Cesareans and more rarely chemical inductions of labor are sometimes necessary to the safety of the mother or baby. At the same time, we need to recognize that cesarean surgery significantly increases the risk of death of a woman. This risk may be higher if new surgical techniques are widely introduced before they adequately are monitored for their relatively safety. Please understand that my wish is not to frighten but to inform. In this chapter, I have kept in mind the words of too many women who have told me, I wish I had known this when I was still pregnant. Over the past 40 years, I have watched as wave after wave of medical fads have washed over the institution of modern childbirth. But one thing, unfortunately, has not changed. The push to discover a panacea to cure the pain and inconvenience of childbirth drives many doctors and midwives to experiment. So it's saying that people are driven by a desire to find a way for a painless birth. There has to be a way. Or at least to convince women that there is such is available now. And women are usually the last to know. So that was a really good chapter. That was chapter 11. What's the next chapter? The next chapter is vaginal birth after cesarean. So that's going to be a really good chapter. I don't know if I'm going to be reading over during the holidays. I might not. I'm not too sure. We only have 2 more chapters and then we are done with this book. I don't know what book we're going to read next, but let me know if you guys have any questions, and please share this video if you know of someone that would like to watch this or is interested in learning this type of stuff. And that's it. You guys have a good one.